Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today's video was inspired by a single comment on my energy update video for 2025. This one comment actually sparked a tremendous thought for me. What are the other potentialities, the other timelines that could possibly happen this year? And guess what? I came up with 5 possible timelines for the way that this year could unfold. And so again, where did this information come from? Well, my attuned spidey senses receive a continuous data stream from what I call my own future self that has already seen the probabilities unfold. So it might sound a little bit out there, but regardless, this is going to be a wild ride. So grab your popcorn and let's dive in. As you may or may not know, one of the main reasons I love both evolutionary astrology and the gene keys is that it speaks in terms of frequency. See, there's no placement, no planet, no sign, no gene key that is fated to be good or fated to be bad on its own. Instead, the outcome of this particular planet or this transit is completely dependent on the frequency of the individual. So again, it speaks into more free will, but also more self-responsibility. So Saturn in Capricorn, for instance, could, at a lower frequency, it could mean experiencing the heavy hand of the system's oppression, man's law. However, at a higher frequency range, this could mean that the transit is a time of witnessing natural law, the rules that govern the logos of the universe, imparting the great secrets of absolute truth. So therefore, Saturn in Capricorn isn't bad or good. It just has multiple different expressions. And in fact, it invites us to step up. So yes, evolutionary astrology gives us space to consider different timelines, and that's what this video is all about. The various timeline potentials that could lie ahead for 2025. A big year that many of us are already feeling, and I think the events confirm we've had a pretty active January, folks. So before I dive in, I recommend that you stay to the end because I have a special opportunity to help you figure out exactly what your highest timeline looks like for 2025 and also how to align to that. Okay, let's get in with the good stuff. So I love working with timelines because it allows us to explore all the angles of a situation without being overly doom and gloom or overly optimistic. In a way, we can explore all possibilities equally without a bias. And I think this is really healthy to do. I actually was trained as an engineer, and engineers, when we're building things, we need to make sure that we're looking at all potential risks, right? You don't just want to go and build a bridge and say, yay, it looks pretty, let's drive cars across it. You need to make sure it's stress tested. You need to make sure that there's a factor of safety. And so in a way, by assessing some of the potentially viewed as negative timelines, it kind of gives us a factor of safety for what we don't want to be doing and what we could potentially happen if we go in the wrong direction. And in many ways, a lot of the times when you speak into the potential negative outcomes, it actually begins to dispel them. So by just listening and processing them without fear or reaction, we actually dismantle that future timeline from happening, which is pretty cool. Similarly, the ones that we do want to happen, the ones that we do want to emerge, by hearing about them, we can tune into them and we can actually start to embody that frequency, which then makes that timeline slightly more likely. So as a result, automatically, just by watching this video, we're going to make the good stuff happen and we're going to make the bad stuff less likely. So let's begin with the first one. So here's our middle of the road outcome for 2025. And I'm talking about a situation where collectively we don't slip up, but at the same time, we don't step up either. So this timeline will likely see a number of increased weather events, especially those involving floods and torrential rains. Donald Trump will continue to galvanize American politics, and the truth will be muddled by a spiraling sense of right-left conflict, not only in America, but in Europe and Canada as well. The finger pointing will continue, but the good news is that there'll be a minimal amount of physical altercations as economic, environmental, and well-being issues, human health, are basically brought to the forefront. So in this scenario, I still expect to see financial markets taking a steep correction, especially in the first quarter. And basically the fires of angst that are present right now do not actually blow over into fully fledged chaos when the next flashpoint occurs. And again, I'm not saying that I know what that is, but there's plenty of events that happen that get people aggravated, as we've seen over the last 5 years, especially, but even going back 10 or 15 years as well. Really the 21st century has been one big trigger fest, folks. So we saw with the fires in LA that the collective response was mostly supportive without tipping over into too much infighting. So on this particular middle of the road timeline, there's definitely an increased intensity, but we hold our ground and we do not succumb to the chaos. This is the important part. So this alone requires a degree of restraint and basic maturity, which I feel is actually growing over the last 4 years. It's been the school of hard knocks for a lot of people, but they've had to wake up, they've had to take self-responsibility, and they've had to basically start thinking for themselves. And I also see on this timeline, there's a more gradual transition from self-destructive lifestyles into more holistic and healthy ones. So with RFK and the new US administration, we do see a disgraced big pharma. So whether he actually steps up to the plate and does his job, I think the cat's already out of the box and people are already questioning a lot more. And of course, the truth seekers are speaking loud and bold and clear and posting all the studies that have come out recently. So there's a crude awakening. And not only that, but people who maybe bought into the thing before have had their health impacted. And as a result of that, they're kind of wondering, it's like, well, maybe this isn't everything I signed up for. So at least we have the promise of less censorship, albeit with a rise in sophisticated AI that may disguise itself as real internet users. So this timeline still has a lot of challenges. I foresee definitely some upheavals, some flashpoint events, some economic difficulties on here, and we get through the end of the year with another, thank God 2025 is over, but overall, okay. And some of us, of course, are doing well. The people who follow their inner instruction, they're going to be a little bit ahead of the pack. The pack is going to be a little bit more jangled, and they're probably going to be postponing their real breakthrough event for another 2 or 4 years. So now let's move on to something a little bit more exciting, but maybe a little bit more confrontive. Let's take a look at the worst possible timeline for 2025. Now, I say worst in terms of keeping things together without falling into chaos, and worst potentially for the evolution of the human collective. So I believe that this could be a year that goes very wrong if we allow it to, because the energies are just so massive and so intense, and that if we pour our fears and anger and rage and hate out there, these energies are just going to amplify it and really kind of blow it back in our face. So it's important to be aware of this, but also realize at the same time, this does not mean it's going to happen. In fact, like I said earlier, simply hearing this potentiality allows us to process it internally and release it. I studied shamanism for 22 years. And many shamans from different cultures around the world, if they knew there was an impending war or famine or drought, they would often try to avoid it in the physical by going into non-ordinary reality. So they'd go into shamanic voyaging states, and they would actually process the conflict or the drought or the famine there, and then they would return. And oftentimes it would take care of itself, because this event is like coming through the higher dimensions, through the non-physical layers, and it hasn't yet manifested yet. So there's a way we can kind of get in front of it before it comes to physical manifestation. I call this early warning detection. And it's the same thing as those gut hits that you get early on that most of us maybe struggle listening to unless you've really been doing your work and you get it what's an early warning detection signal, and you get the faint detection before it blows up into a full-on lesson. So yeah. So by processing this, we basically are able to speak into it and let it go fully. So in my sharing of these words, it's already starting to dispel the probability of this happening more and more. So just want to precede that, because this scenario is quite intense, and this would only happen basically if we collectively lost control. And of course, that starts with our own individual actions and attitudes. So this would be something where there's massive reactions to some sort of a triggered event in Q1 that causes a collective emotional storm. And this emotional storm is actually pathetic fallacy for the weather. So in essence, Mother Nature gets amplified by our own chaotic emotions, our own fighting, probably erupting into physical violence, and definitely some really horrific things being said to each other. And this would lead to essentially a flare-up of decimating weather that displaces millions and decimates economies. So in a short period of time, many sections of the first world countries fall into disarray as people are forced into survivalist conditions for extended periods of time. And we would begin to see things like racial infighting, definitely political infighting. This is really where we kind of fall into base consciousness, and it becomes really about survival and fighting for the tribe. So there's a lot of conflict in this scenario. And as a result of this, there's not really a lot of foresight. There's not really a lot of thought or consciousness going into any actions. So this leads to an increasingly desperate situation over the coming year that paves the way for mass casualties and the introduction of digital IDs to those who do survive, which still will be a significant part of the global population. But I think when we get there, we would be pretty traumatized. And I've got to say, again, this is not the most probable timeline. It is definitely is the most intense and the most grim. But in this occurrence, the awakening movement is effectively curtailed, and many of the advanced beings on the planet engage their evacuation plan and get out of here with a small group of those capable enough to engage. So, if you're pulling your weight and you're doing your work, I mean, that's all you can ever do. You can't control the human collective. You can certainly influence it. And the universe and the positive frame of reference you're in definitely has a massive impact on the timeline that you personally experience. But I also want to say too, that it isn't necessarily doom and gloom. I mean, some of us will be better off. I recall the story of Gurdjieff in World War II. He lived in Nazi-occupied France, and he lived in a castle. They drank wine, they ate chocolate, while the rest of France basically rationed food. He was able to continue with his students, continue the work, continue his studies of consciousness at a time that was very difficult for the rest of the country. So there will still be silos of people doing things, but it will be much more sparse. It will be much more disconnected from any larger movements. So the primary driving force here is if we allow ourselves to be emotionally swayed by the storyline that is playing out right now. So this is effectively if we lose the wisdom we have gained over the last 4 years, 10 years, 15 years, 25 years collectively. And for some of my older fans that they've known since the 60s and 70s, if we lose that wisdom and we lose touch with everything that we've learned, we do stand upon a pretty solid foundation here. So it does take a lot to knock us off. And of course, the background noise will get louder to try to knock us off, but it's our job to stand firm. And just by standing firm, we are going to get a timeline that's much like that first one I described. So the next one I want to speak about is basically second place from the bottom, or fourth place in terms of least favorability. For me personally, at least, some of you might have a chaos fetish, and that's cool too. But in this timeline, there is some self-awareness that develops at the 11th hour. So in short, we catch ourselves before tipping over completely and going into blind rage. This means that there are large consequences. The weather plays out devastating patterns. The economy is hit massively hard, and conflicts do happen, but it's curbed at the last moment. So there's still quite a bit of damage here and hardship, but we don't cross that tipping point into the massive societal decline. So it's likely here regional conflicts will flare up and die down. Each passing one will be exhausting the will of people to identify and get outraged. And that's why any of this is still happening, is because people are identified, and the larger process of divine evolution is basically trying to exhaust that faction of humanity that's still attached to the drama, attached to the movie that the fallen ones are playing out for us. Okay, so this one does sort of have a better ending than the worst case scenario, but it's still a very difficult path to go on. Okay, so we've got the difficult stuff out of the way. Now we can start talking about the good stuff. We've already spoken about the middle path and the worst case, so the bad news or the bad possibilities are out of the way, which of course they're not going to happen, right, team? We're going to make sure that none of that stuff I just talked about happens. We're going to go better. We're going to go to the highest end of the spectrum here. So don't worry about that. We just spoke into it. We just processed it. We just moved through it. And now really we're going to look at the bright side of the coin. So this side is really bright. It does take a little bit of work, though, quite a bit of work. It means that we listen to the one thing that matters, which is our own inner guidance system. And as cliche as this sounds, it can actually be quite difficult when the background noise gets really loud out there. We get tested I mean, the propaganda machine is getting smarter and smarter. I mean, we all, we're saying, oh, I don't fall for left-right politics, but then, something new happens. The rules of the game change and everybody's back into a left-right dialectic once again, as evidence since Donald Trump got elected. We've seen this playing out to a T. So far, we have a little bit of work to course correct that. And, I can't tell you how many people I know still say yes when they actually mean no inside. So they effectively override their loud intuition with deeply conditioned actions. And this is when, we get ourselves confused and in messes where we can't find a way out. So we externalize the answers to the political or spiritual authorities. And by the way, the spiritual authorities, the ones that are, on the influencer level, the ones that are basically just playing the game, but actually are not tapped in, or they're tapped into, the distorted astral layer. These ones are going to get flushed down with the toilet show, folks. They're not going to be around, especially in these higher timelines. And that's sort of the one thing that I guess we will have to witness is as the truth asserts itself. So I already covered what's going to happen here and what our navigation system is in the great cycle content that I was doing back in September. So if you haven't seen the workshop, you haven't seen my 2027 video, you need to check that video out, and you can get yourself a copy of the workshop where I go into great detail about the coming change in the background frequency. It's in the description below. I highly recommend it, especially if you're new to the channel and you want to get caught up about the changes that are coming very quickly according to the human design system and the precession of the equinoxes. So this basically shows you how this new cycle is so different from the cycle that we're currently in. We're already starting to feel a blending period of it. And we're moving basically from collective to individual, from details and hard work to radical reliance on intuition, from, bartered deals with other people to finding our own inner gifts and superpowers. And it is a very exciting time, but you also need to know how to navigate it, because there's a lot of subconscious beliefs and axioms, which are unquestioned foundational beliefs that keep us kind of plugged into the old way of doing things. So we really have to reroute our thinking completely. This is important though, because this is going to be the one needle mover that's going to decide if we're on a higher timeline or not. If we basically move with the program, and this part of the program is the program that's already been there. Listen to your inner source connection, folks. So if people actually tune out the noise, which of course we know is getting louder, they'll quickly find how simple and seamlessly things work. So the policies that put up unnecessary red tape just won't be listened to, leading to innovation in places that have been stifled of innovation, such as Europe, Australia, and Canada. Americans will form relationships with Chinese people through cultural exchange on apps like, what's that one called? It's Red something that all the kids are using now, and they're finding out about the life in China that other kids are experiencing. And business will see a massive return of Eastern knowledge, Asian health knowledge. I've just been exposed to in my time in Bali of how advanced some of the Asian market is that we don't even hear about in the West. Not only that, but the Russian medical system and what they're doing with regenerative DNA work and endocrine stabilization. Like, these are very advanced concepts that are very simple to apply, that have been medically researched. When they start coming to the West and we get this taste of not, alternative medicine anymore, or, what was typically seen as woo-woo, but is actually seen as studied, peer-reviewed medicine that's extremely high frequency and effective, it's going to be a game changer. So everyone will be talking about, acupuncture and meridians, and they'll be much more aware of their health if this does happen. So there will be, in this timeline, there is a cooling off of markets, but the change in economic policy allows for kind of a soft landing as opposed to a harsh recession, which is really only a problem for the people who are thinking that all assets are going to moon right now and they're going all in on their investments. So the Trump presidency does cause waves in the world and is met with backlash amongst liberals. However, by some strange fluke, everything seems to sort itself out as the economy doesn't tank. The truth comes out regarding the last 4 years. There's less censorship, and AI gets implemented in a way that totally rules our lives. That doesn't totally rule our lives, sorry. And I just want to say too, I am not, I'm apolitical when it comes to this. I am simply an observer. But looking at the dynamics, an individual like Donald Trump, he, the way he speaks he deconstructs our idea of what politics should look like, and that in itself wakes people up. So he is a disruptor. You know, I saw a tarot reader pull the Tower card, and that's exactly what his energy is when it comes to politics. Is he is the one basically leading the slow demolition or quick demolition, depending on what timeline we're on, of the old world. So that's my perspective on him. And we can either choose to accept that that's the role he's playing in this movie, or we can get outraged and we can try to resist it, which takes a lot of energy and leads to some of those more negative outcomes. So I always say, you know, don't resist it. You don't have to buy into policies, and especially the ones that are just crazy, like invading Canada or kicking, you know, legitimate people out of the country. Like, I mean, this is obviously stuff that, you know, very few people actually want to happen, but they kind of go along with it because they're on that particular bandwagon. So this is another important thing, is that we need to lose the attachment to identity politics, because this scenario provides enough room for people to actually fully awaken and start creating new solutions in the world. This is more of a gradual process, but it really leads to positive outcomes in the year 2027, 2029, and eventually in 2032. So as a result, many of the negative agendas of the last 5 years are halted, and many of the proposed new agendas simply don't pan out. It's like we caught them off guard during the final changing of the guard, when they were going to unleash sort of a hastily put together master plan. And I'm going to be talking about this in my upcoming series, where we dive into the mechanics of reality. We dive into the actual reason for this whole fallen system that we find ourselves in, how it all formed, and also what we can do as individuals to get ourselves out of here and get ourselves back on a evolutionary pathway in the most efficient and effective way possible. And this is really a huge expose on natural law, and this is coming up on the channel very soon. So this situation that I've described here isn't even the best situation. There is one final timeline which I would consider to be the most positive. And it does require quite a leap from where we are now. I would say that there's still more probable than the most negative outcome. So this is very good. However, it does require us to get our A game on. And I'm also going to share with you guys at the end of the video how you guys can do that based on a way that I've been working with and I've created with Trifecta. That's super cool. So basically, in this situation, we're looking at something like the individuals that are currently kind of controlling the narrative or stepped into the new narrative, they actually follow through on their promises. So they don't end up to be, you know, agents, and they basically overhaul the medical establishment. And whether this is by design or whether this is by a happy accident, I don't really know. But Big Pharma and Big Agra basically pack their bags, and instead there is a real effort made to educate people about health and their food systems and a return to more natural local scale economy, especially when it comes to food and health. So we're no longer being governed by large multinational corporations that are effectively putting who knows what into our food and what we consume. So the weather patterns do play out on this timeline, but they're not catastrophic. This in turn gets more on board with resiliency and claiming self-responsibility by forming dual power structures outside of the system. So instead of people reacting, people basically get smart and say, okay, well, this is a part of life now. And so we need to basically form our own form of resilience. We can't trust these outside forces to try to come in and save us. So we're going to go and we're going to build our communities, and we're going to form proper bonds with each other. So as this happens, the system realizes that it can't sustain any power anymore because people now wield their own power. And instead of collapsing, it fades into a decline as a new sprouting culture shoots up in its place. So the time lag between decline and renaissance in this timeline is actually very short, and we end the year with many authentic-hearted individuals that are actually taking positions of power. So we might even see a changing of the people who are currently in power globally around the world, and there might be some surprises in the mix. So many abusers of power, deceitful influencers, and ill-intent individuals are served karma and displaced from their thrones. So I'm talking politicians, I'm talking entertainers, I'm talking these spiritual influencers as well, of course, because I feel like a lot of them are actually misleading people because they're not plugged into a true-hearted source. They're actually plugged into a very manipulative and deceitful source that just looks beautiful. So by now you're probably hearing this and saying, well, gee, Dave, obviously I want this last scenario to happen, because this really sounds like what I signed up for this lifetime. And I agree. This is what we all want. This is where we're going to get to see, geodesic domes, and we're going to get to see, healing neighborhoods, and we're going to get to see everyone growing their own food again and treating nature respectfully, and a real symbiosis between humans and the world that we live on. But wishful thinking isn't going to get us there. It's not a matter of just sitting back and doing our little practices that we're currently doing and thinking that that's good enough to make it happen. It's about becoming uncompromising about following our inner instructions, which can lead to quite radical things at different times. So it's not about actually just being reliable and predictable. It's actually about listening to whatever's arising from here, which might be reliable and predictable, or it might be quite radical at certain times. So this isn't easy to do based on the millennia of genetic conditioning and a very, very clever propaganda machine that's bought into us, not to mention the things that are now in our biology that have come from food and airborne toxins and other sources, and basically are influencing us and dumbing us down and calcifying the pineal gland. I mean, that's a real thing, the calcification of the pineal gland. It's not just woo-woo. And the solution to this, and probably why I love Trifecta so much, is because there is a way where we can get real hard-hitting, personalized cosmic knowledge of what we can do. So this is really cosmic knowledge in alignment with natural law. And I see it as basically reclaiming our instructions from mission control, from the oversoul layer of reality, the team that we came in with. It's like getting clear on our signal for 2025. You see, all the spiritual systems out there have energetics of a fall system, almost all of them. And this is really what I've been spending my time doing with Trifecta and quantum rebalancing, is basically extricating any of the systems that were hooked into false systems and creating natural law-based systems. So this is really reclaiming spirituality. And this is something that's going to be talked about more and more as we see things like True Sky Astrology increasing in popularity. We see people stop using the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life from the Kabbalah, and instead using the original Tree of Life Kabbalah, which is the Cathara grid, switching from base 10 to base 12. There is so many different aspects of our spiritual systems that are just unquestioned, that are actually based on this fall system that's not in natural law, that gives you a hit of the multi-dimensions, but eventually manipulates you. And so this is the important thing to realize, is that when we clear the distortions and we're again working with the pure mechanics of how nature works, we operate in a symbiosis with nature, and things happen a lot faster. So natural law-based mechanics simply describe the various field effects that cultivate more quanta, whereas fall-based systems basically extract quanta from people. So by using this approach that I'm going to tell you about, you can live beyond the dramas of the earth plane, be in the world but not of it, and instead create a powerful impact from your own source-driven intelligence. You can effectively reclaim your divinity. And the good part about it is it's actually a focus thing for the mind. So I already started doing it this year, and I've had amazing results. So this one thing that I'm talking about here is basically the Trifecta solar return process. So it basically uses the solar profection technique with a Western sidereal whole sign chart. So this is as close as you can get to Jyotish using Western astrology, but it has all the perks of Western astrology as well, such as the outer planets and Chiron. So from there, we then look at the true sidereal body graph, and we basically pick our trifecta placements and we run them through a solar return. And so when I did this for myself, I found such an amazing realization. It was really a confirmation and an amalgamation of a lot of things that have been circling around in my awareness, but I was able to put them together into a real meaningful plan. So the first thing I saw was that my the year I'm moving into, which started on January 12th, is a year of the 6th house. So it's really about health. It's about working hard, but it's really about taking care of my body again. However, the ruler of that 6th house, Pisces is the 6th house. So it's about being spiritual. It's about being in touch with the divine, and then ruled by Jupiter, which is in the 3rd house. So it involves a lot of making content, speaking, communication. And so this is going to be a year of a lot of communication. And I had already been planning this series that I've been talking about about a few times on this channel. And that's going to be a big undertaking, folks. So you're going to see me talking, you're going to hear me talking a lot in the next little while as this comes online. And then when I looked at the true sidereal solar return, running my trifecta, I basically saw all of them converging on this is a year for teamwork. This is a year for open heart communication. This is a year for seeing, the universality of human beings and not getting caught up in dominating other people or in petty conflicts. And so this gave me so much awareness of where I need to focus my attention to be on the highest timeline. And not only that, but I've also been doing these solar return readings for people, and I've been able to do things like pinpoint exactly when they're going to be able to find land, what they need to do to find that ideal piece of land, how to upscale into a new career path, and the two internal blocks that this other person had to overcome in order to find that. So it's a really powerful way of basically getting you in touch with the one thread that's going to be the needle mover in your own life for listening to your own instructions. And of course, I don't want you to use the system like it's, gospel. I want you to use the system and co-create it with your own intuition. And that's the beauty of what I'm going to show you in what I have planned here, which is basically, and you can find it in the description below, but I've got a workshop coming up on February 10th and 11th. It's pay what you want. So I just want you there, basically, and I want to show you how to do these techniques, especially if you're an astrologer or human design analyst. You really want to check this out because you're going to see this never really been done before approach to solar perfections and solar returns. And you can do this for yourself. You can do this for your family, but you can basically give people in your life a very powerful reading on, their year ahead for this year, for any year, but especially this year, because this is a big year. So I want to make sure everybody is locked in with their own inner mission control this year based on the cosmic natural law dynamics of a open source system, not a closed system like I talk about some fall systems out there. So this is really the best bet. I am doing trifecta solar return readings, but I'm actually booked out until mid-February almost at this point. And some people said, hey, I'm looking for a more accessible option. So this workshop is your more accessible option. So I really hope to see you there. And if you haven't already got your free 3-day Reveal and Heal My Core Wound, because you're new to this channel and you're just hearing about it, go down in the description below, get your free reading, and begin working with my trifecta system by healing your collective wound. That will basically make your passage through 2025 much easier once that is rectified, and you get to do that on this 3-day journey. So thank you for watching this video. Thank you for sticking around for the updates. Please leave your comments below and make sure you subscribe, make sure you like this video. And next up will be my foray into the Mechanics of Reality series. See you later, folks.